All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Drew Williams. I'm the marketing manager for Kobiton, and this is our webinar entitled Enterprise Test Automation, Communicating Directives and Avoiding Failures. Today we are joined by Mush Honda, the VP of Testing at KMS Technology. Mush is a very successful and experienced testing executive, both at KMS and as well as a past life at various other companies. So with that, I'll let Mush go ahead and take it over.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you for the very warm and pleasant introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. So my goal and objective today is to explain to the audience, what have been some of the perils that I have encountered in my 20-year experience of automation and testing, and also help you guys understand what have been some of the success factors and how do we ultimately, as a team, avoid failures and demonstrate the true advantage and benefit that test automation brings to any enterprise. So moving on to the key area of how automation initiatives and projects are actually, or most commonly, I would say, implemented in organizations, right? And the way I look at that is the common thing I'm sure each one of us at some point in our career have always heard, which is, hey, can you go figure this out, right? And typically what happens is that is given to us by our managers, by our directors, by the VPs of the organization, where they have perhaps gone to a conference or have gone to a talk and have heard other members who have achieved great success in getting their product out to market in a high velocity, are preaching about the benefits and the confidence that they have in their quality. And because they want to replicate that success within their organization as well, just as an overall market strategy, they want to go in and leverage what everybody else is talking about within their organization. And hence, the top-down initiative or the directive comes in to say, hey, how can we apply this within our organization? And oh, by the way, you seem to be the person who understands testing, who understands what it takes to get speed and confidence in what we deliver. So why don't you help me? And by the way, go figure this out, right? So the key thing for us to take that top-down directive and how should I, as the accountable, responsible tester or IT leader for my team, how should I take that directive and how should I translate that, right? And the three key points of advice that I have for all of the listeners who are, have gotten this directive or are anticipating this directive to come to them of going to figure this out, what are the three key things that you should be doing, right? The very first one absolutely must be to understand what is it that you need to get accomplished, right? Figuring out test automation is not just as simple as identifying the tools and then just taking the very latest and greatest of the new technology and then just jumping into it, right? The key question you have to ask yourself is, what is the main purpose and what is the key objective that we're trying to achieve, right? What that translates into is basically having a list, I would say anywhere between 3 to 5 items or factors that describe what your success is, right? One of the key things that I have learned over my tenure with different organizations has been, success is defined very differently between organizations, even between teams, right? So it's very important before you are taking the journey to actually go implement an enterprise-wide test automation strategy, you have to know what your success factors is, right? What is it that the executives, your direct manager, your boss is trying to achieve? Is it purely speed of operation? Is it better test coverage? Is it more focus on integration factors tied to your application? What is it that when you achieve those measurable items, will you be considered successful, right? And then the third component that I always advise my current teams, I advise my clients, all of them, is every time you get an initiation or an initiative to implement test automation, you cannot treat it as a side project. You absolutely cannot do that. You cannot put it on the back burner and say, all right, I'm going to go try to do automation only when I have some available time away from what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. Your project has to be treated like a development project. You have to have dedicated resources. You have to have dedicated processes, whether it's agile, Kanban, what have you. But you have to definitely treat that as a key dedicated development project. If you want to make the initiative a success, you want to really benefit from the items that and the successes that are tied to test automation. Moving on to the next slide. Here's the three key things that I believe we have to look at when we talk about common pitfalls, right? As I was mentioning earlier, as engineers, right, we are always excited to use the latest technology, the newest tools that are out there. With us being given access to repos, GitHub, they have so much of new tools that are always coming out, and a lot of people who also try it out and feel that it has solved their problems, right? And then again, as an engineer, I'm always curious about, hey, how do I use tools that leverage AI? How do I use tools that leverage machine learning? How can I apply reinforced learning? Things of that nature are always front and center for us, right? When it comes down to being successful with a good solid test automation rollout, you definitely have to curb that enthusiasm from the latest and greatest tool, and instead start with a solid strategy, right? What is it really that you're trying to achieve? What is the platform and what is the problem that you're trying to solve, right? Is there a problem with just the level of defects and the impacts to business in a particular area? Is it more around a new product that is coming into play, and there's a new technology stack that's being applied? What would be the role of the testers in that application when that goes to market? So stepping back and thinking really about what are going to be the different workflows, what are going to be the different objectives, tying that back to, hey, what are we really trying to achieve and quantify as success, right? Understanding those sorts of items, and then putting together ideas about what the scope of work and what the scope of testing needs to be is going to be the key, right? You may have a product that is more heavy on APIs and not so much on UI. You may have a product that is very dependent on transactional data, right? You have to step into that level of detail and think about how you're going to actually solve the problem of validations and assertions and testings of all of those components, and what would be the appropriate level of coverage needed for each of those types of tests. And then once you have that identified, then you go out and do your research or look at forums and talk to vendors that can then talk about how specifically do they have a tool or a product offering that helps you meet that test strategy that is applicable for your product or your organization. which basically takes us into the next sort of pitfall, right? That once you have your strategy identified, you have to be very strategic in evaluating and assessing the different tools or the products that fit your need, right? I have been involved in evaluations and assessments where the vendors have given no free access, no trials, or also in those situations where they give you a very limited feature set of capabilities that you can try, and they want you to get into a mode of a long-term contract, for example. So those things are equally important. Don't fall into those sorts of pitfalls where you get tied into a lot of long-term commitment, right? In addition to that, always think about what is the future path of where your maturity of testing needs to go, right? So you may be in a situation where your application is just a new design concept, so you may not even be close to an MVP, and you are responsible for making sure that the functionality and the capability sits and works as expected. In that sense, do you actually get in there and look at, hey, I'm going to be focused on just functional testing in the short term, next 6 months, for example, right? However, what we as a business anticipate is a lot of growth and a lot of user base coming in 6-9 months from now, right? How can I preemptively be set up in a solution for making sure that the performance validations are done? What do the tools actually that I'm picking allow me to do that, right? Which will support that scalability. From a pure automation tooling perspective, right? If you're using open source tools, for example, right, when you are setting up your frameworks within your IDE, think about, am I at a stage where I have a team that needs to follow a certain style guide for how we apply naming conventions for variables? Do I need to have an execution KPI that I establish upfront, right? What is going to be the modeling of my automation framework? Am I going to go with a page object model? Am I just going to go with an explicit call? Things of that nature, right? You have to make sure that you are understanding and identifying those components, and then putting a risk factor associated with it to say, hey, long term, right? Next 6 months, next 9 months, next 15 months, what is going to be the scope of work that I do? And once you have that identified, right, or at least you have a general understanding of what all is anticipated and expected, right, that's where you then combine that knowledge with saying, okay, what is the right tool I need to pick? A lot of teams also, just based on the time pressure that we are under always, right? We are not looking, stopping and taking a look at the big picture view. We are always looking at just what's ahead of us, right? What's there in the next sprint? What's there in the next release, right? And it's very important that you actually step back and take that holistic picture and absorb all of the things that you ultimately want to be able to do in an ideal state, and associate a risk factor for it, and then chop your way down to say, hey, what is the maximum that I can do? What is the absolute minimum that I must do, right? And let your gauge fall somewhere in between that, right? Typically, what I have seen is, again, as I was saying earlier, if you do not treat your automation initiative as a dedicated development project, the likelihood of it failing is going to be very, very high. And the reason why I strongly believe that is because, it setting up an automation framework, setting up tools that integrate with each other, it is a complicated process. So you cannot say that it's going to be on my back burner. I'm going to try it in bits and pieces as a secondary initiative, while I focus on my day focus is going to be on really just manually testing. Because guess what? As the product that you're testing matures, your scope of tests are going to increase, your effort will increase. You're going to have either added capacity or added complexity. right? And ultimately, your objectives or your initiatives of test automation is going to still sit in the on the backlog or in the back burner, right? And you're not going to make a whole lot of progress like you should, right? Think about, if you develop software and all you did was say, hey, I'm going to only develop certain features of it, and not look at the project as a holistic product. That project is also not going to fall too successfully, in my opinion, right? So it's very important that when you start an initiative to start an automation framework or a similar initiative with test automation, make sure that you are upfront very clear with your manager, with your stakeholders, that this has to be treated like a development project. Okay. So because we are talking about automation frameworks, I think one of the key aspects that have occurred in the past, right, especially from a tester's perspective, is the growth in the overall mobile adoption, right? So traditionally, what we have been used to as automation engineers or testers has been all about web browser based tools, applications that we are then testing, right? But I was intrigued by the different projects that I am encountering now in my career, where mobile adoption and support and requests for testing capabilities and services around the mobile front are growing, right? And I have some data on this slide that sort of is used to sort of reflect just to show the sheer volume for people who are not potentially following this just as yet. Just in 2018 alone, right? By the end of 2018, globally there was more than 5 billion unique mobile users. So just in terms of sheer volume, right? That's just amazing, right? What's also interesting is smartphones made almost 75% of those total mobile devices, right? From a pure application perspective, there's been over 200 billion mobile app downloads worldwide, right? And as far as investments and attempts to be, businesses to be successful on the mobile front, there's been over 100 billion spent already on mobile apps. So, both from revenue generation or revenue opportunities, but also from an investment perspective, those numbers are just extremely high, right? And this is something that we were able to get from Hootsuite, or on the Next Web website. You guys can go and find the detailed report there as well. So the reason why I bring that up, right, is because you're going to find a situation, if you've not already encountered that, where if you are in an organization that is not mobile first, just from a business opportunity perspective, there's a very high likelihood that mobile is going to become a top priority within your organization, if not the only top priority, right? And the reason why I say that is because all of the opportunity that exists for getting an audience to use your product and integrating just with how socially and culturally people are adapting to their devices, right? It's a matter of time where you will get that directive similar to what I was talking about earlier, which is, hey, go figure this out. Oh, by the way, we need to have mobile included in our product suite, right? So when you actually get that, if you haven't already, here are some of the recommendations that I have to help you be successful in implementing an automation strategy that is specific to mobile, right? The key part that I would say, the number one thing that you have to understand and focus on is, what is the workflow that we are trying to identify as part of this mobile adoption, right? Who is the audience of our mobile solution, right? Is it internal? Is it corporate? Is it the average consumer? Location-wise, is it in the US? Is it Europe? Is it South America? Is it Asia? Where and what are the specific workflows that are going to be executed as part of the mobile space, and how does that actually overall impact the entire workflow of the application, right? So making sure you understand what is the business purpose and the workflow intent of the mobile device and mobile application is going to be critical. Number one, I would say, right? The other aspect of it is all around security. So I'm sure you guys are familiar, with all of the recent hacks and leaks of privacy data that we've heard. Data security is also a key concern. So when you get the directive to say, hey, we need mobile test support, or we need automation in the mobile space, or we're going to go mobile, right? Identify what is the scope of data security and validation that is needed from the testing side, right? Do you need to call in niche service providers that do a lot of the data specific security testing, or is it that it's more about what happens when you log out, what happens when you are offline, how is data stored on your device, what sort of data actually gets exchanged and synced with other integrating software, other reports, things of that nature. You have to make sure that the scope of that security around the data aspect is clearly defined. The third other important aspect on it is also what are the different platforms and devices, right? So, every launch of iOS, Apple forums or Google forums and Android forums, they always talk about the latest and greatest software version that's there, and the different plethora of devices that exist, right? Just with a combination of Android software and device providers, right? Just looking at one, right? Samsung, right? Just think about how many devices are actively out there, right? Does it make sense from a test strategy perspective for automation that we do an exhaustive combination? Probably doesn't make the most sense, right? So being able to get some data around, hey, what is the intended user base for our application? What are the different platforms that we're going to support, and what are the most common devices that we anticipate or expect the user audience to be within, and then use that as a prioritized list of saying, here's where we're going to focus on those sorts of mobile devices to test first, and so forth and so on, right? Is it going to be a native app? Is it going to be a browser-based one? Is it going to be a progressive web app, right? Is it going to be reactive? Or responsive, right? I mean, you have to think about all of those, and it's better to have those identified upfront so you can have a solid strategy, right? Also understand, from a growth perspective, where is that going to take us, right? Are we launching with just a browser-based version now, and then it's going to evolve into a progressive web app? Things of that nature also are critical to identify upfront to make your enterprise strategy not get obsolete, right? The other aspect is around integration, right? So as I was talking earlier, when you identify what are the workflows that your mobile audience is going to be interacting with, how does those interactions fit into the overall workflow for your enterprise application, right? Where does the data go? How often is it synced? What updates need to come in? Can there be concurrent interactions on the same functional area for that particular profile? Asking those sorts of questions and understanding those domain related workflows are also key, and are a solid need for a good test strategy. And then finally, when you are not a mobile first organization, and mobile is a secondary aspect, and now becomes front and center and moves up the priority list, you always have to step back and look at, from your existing artifacts and tools, what can be reused for your mobile support, mobile strategy, right? How would any reusing of any of these tools and artifacts help your maintenance effort to be kept at a minimum. Even if you don't have existing tools that you are reusing, as you identify new tools, a good way of proactively thinking about maintenance effort as you create your test automation artifacts has to be kept in mind, right? How often will I have to go back and clear up my technical debt? How soon will I be accumulating technical debt, as it seems with speed or capabilities and things of that nature, right? And identifying at least an approximate roadmap of how you want to scale your solution upfront, and having ideas around that upfront is going to help a lot strategically to have a solid strategy of saying, here's how I'm going to make sure that the tools that I pick for my solution are going to long last me and be scalable as our product matures, as a test strategy and test coverage matures as well. So, keeping all of that in mind, here's some data that I think, Drew, you can probably cover. This was something that I think we had identified from one of your case studies that was done, right?
Yeah, that's correct. As a matter of fact, this data is from a case study we did with a large healthcare enterprise a few months back, where we essentially helped them accomplish 3 years worth of testing in just 30 days via 24/7 parallel automation test runs across a wide breadth of our Kobiton devices. As you can see, they were able to test on multiple device manufacturers, operating systems, and even networks, as well as team locations and geographies. Moving on a little bit to show you some more of what they were able to accomplish. If you want to get into the granular details, they did over 200,000 minutes worth of testing with an 89% success rate and average test duration of about an hour and 19 minutes. And so what that means is that while being able to accomplish all of these things, they were able to dramatically increase their test and device coverage while shortening their release cycle. And so Kobiton actually has quite a few solutions that can help a lot of teams who are either advanced and mature in their test automation journey, similar to this healthcare enterprise, and or teams that are brand new, kind of starting from square one with manual testing and trying to make the shift to automation testing.
So really, guys, in conclusion, right, I think the two key aspects of success for a solid enterprise strategy, right, is how do you create clarity and how do you create a sort of synergy between the stakeholders, people who are asking you for outcomes, and between the team who's actually delivering and really successfully delivering on those on meeting those outcomes, right? So if you look at it from the two perspectives, the top down initiative, right, the managers, the directors, what is it that they should be talking about and communicating to their teams, and then also looking at what as the key players within a team, what should testers clarify, right? So from a manager and director's perspective, right, the number one thing that has to be communicated to the team as clearly and as early as possible is the end goal, right? What is it that we are trying to achieve, right? And it's a good idea, quite honestly, to have, in essence, two goals, right? One is, what is the absolute minimum that we must apply, which I like to call as reality, right? But then also, what is it that will really make the team appear successful above and beyond, right? So what is the stretch goal that we are trying to achieve, right? Is it, going from a waterfall methodology in an extreme end all the way to agile and continuous deployments, right, being the other end of the spectrum? Is where is your organization going to be identified with this initiative for it being a success? Where, in that spectrum, where would you really fall in as a minimum, aka reality? And then what is an absolute, above and beyond hit out of the ballpark, right? What is your stretch goal that would help make the team successful, right? Tying those in, identifying what the success factors for each of those goals would be, right? As I was mentioning earlier, being able to automate and run tests in a time perspective, right? That all your testing is done within 30 minutes of code being integrated, for as an example, right? Or being able to churn out new features within 2 days, as another example, right? What is it that will classify the team, the project to be a success? You should clearly have that identified upfront and communicate it to the team, right? And then the third, but most important factor also is what are the constraints that the team will have to work within, right? Whether obviously, having a fixed budget, what is your maximum stretch on that? Is there leeway on it? Being very transparent and clear on that, right? If there are specific constraints around the technology stack or the tools that could be used or the type of tools, whether it's a commercial tool or open source, what have you, right? If there are constraints around that, right? And then also the third aspect being time, right? You want to make sure that the team is fully aware of what are the commitments that have potentially been made already out in the field, right? Whether it's with marketing or sales or cadences that are going out tied to the launch of an application or a relaunch of an application or introductions in a new platform, right? What is it from a timing perspective that is a relative constraint for the team that they must adhere to. So that sort of information is going to help your team come up with a solution and a mitigation plan that will help you really come as close as possible, or even be, blow beyond the expectations within the constraints that have been applied, right? Similarly, from the team's perspective, as a tester on a team who has been given the initiative or the directive to go and implement an automation strategy, uh, I would ask about what are the anticipated risks and mitigations that you feel that will exist after you've heard about the constraints and the success criteria for the goals of the engagement, right? So ask and be very clear in bringing up any of the risks that you anticipate, right? I usually try to also assign a level of probability for those risks if they will occur and ultimately become issues, right? And always have a mitigation plan that you recommend, ideally more than one for each of the risks that you say, hey, in case that this particular risk actually becomes an issue, how will you address it? But more importantly, what will you do to prevent that risk from becoming an issue? Right, and you can think of mitigation in three broad categories as well, right? In terms of time, in terms of technology, and in terms of capacity. So in terms of time, that's a classic from a tester's perspective that we always are running into, right? Is there's not enough time to test. What is it that we can get done within that stipulated amount of time? You cannot absolutely use a technology. You have to use a certain technology stack and so forth. What are its limitations in terms of an effective test strategy or coverage that you can offer? And again, constraints on capacity, right? The project demands that we go live in 6 weeks, for example, and you have yourself and another member who's already 50% allocated on a different project, right? Uh, is that even doable, right? And if not, what are your mitigations of saying how do you get extra help? How do you reduce the scope? How do you prioritize your tests? Things of that nature. So being very clear upfront and classifying and really escalating that and making sure that the team is aware of those risks and what are the mitigation plans for that, right? The other important factor that testers should actually always look for and be transparent about are your quantifiable project metrics. So I emphasize a lot on the quantifiable factor, just because I think that with metrics you could make the numbers say whatever you wanted to say, right? So being able to preemptively identify how you will measure the progression of your team to meet a certain success factor for the engagement is very important, right? And I look at metrics in three broad categories, right? So quality, how are you measuring the quality of the product? How are you measuring the quality of your artifacts being created as part of the testing team? what sort of effort is going into from a manual testing perspective, from the manual effort applied to support automation tools, what are the timelines that are going to be tracked for each of the tasks, and so forth, right? And then also, what's important for testers to be very transparent and upfront about are, given the constraints, given the technology stack, given the tools that are becoming part of the solution, what are some of the tests and validations that cannot be supported by the automation tools, right? The key aspect over here also is you have to always think about balancing that with an ROI, right? So just because something can be automated, you should question yourself to say, should it be automated? Because if something that takes 15 seconds to validate, either through a unit test or a quick manual glance, is it valuable to actually spend 4 hours in automating that, right? Especially if you're, say, for example, not going to use it more than twice, right? It's all about risk and the associated ROI for what you pick and choose to be automated as part of your test. The flip side of it is also very true, where there are certain validations that a lot of the tools cannot support, right? And if that's the case, let's be very transparent and clear about what those would be, right? And again, use the mitigation aspect of saying, well, because it cannot be supported by an automation tool just yet, here's how we're going to tackle it, right? And that's very common, I would say, in a lot of the mobile testing that does happen, right? So it's important as testers that we are clear and upfront about what can and cannot be supported. So just the key takeaway there, I think, Drew, we may be able to move over to the next slide and see if there are questions from the audience that we can help answer.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Mush. We do have a few questions here, and there's definitely some more time for anyone who has a question to get some in, but we'll go ahead and get started with what's currently here. As a newcomer into the testing field, I'm just wondering, do companies designate tools for particular projects needed by the team, or does the tester decide?
That's a great question. What I would want is where the testers and the team decide on the tools. I think as an organization gets bigger and you go into an enterprise level, there are a lot of constraints that are imposed to, say, at least from a technology stack perspective, that are emphasized to say you have to be within that stack. There's also, centers of excellence that a lot of the bigger organizations have, where they give recommendations on tools. One of the key things that I typically try to apply is focus on tools that are popular, right? Because they are popular for a particular reason. And tools like Selenium, Appium, those sorts of tools are almost like a standard now across organizations. So as somebody who's new to automation, if you are looking at tool sets that you want to apply, you should definitely look at those tools. Now, along with that, there are tools like Kobiton and others that are bringing in more of the latest and greatest mindsets, right? I'm always excited to talk to Kobiton CTO, who talks about how they're going to implement ML algorithms and things of that nature into a tool. So, you definitely want to stay abreast with what is the latest and greatest and what benefits newer tools and implementations are offering. But I also see at the enterprise levels, you have to work within a smaller constraint or set of technologies that are acceptable for that. The use of tools, in my opinion, gets more relaxed as you go into smaller organizations or you get into teams that are more independently operating, right? And the key reason why you don't get the choice of saying, hey, just use whatever tool you need for whatever solution is because, other testers, other members within the organization have tried to solve similar problems that you are encountering. And if you can learn from somebody else's experience and challenges they faced, and they have already come up with a solution, why would you want to reinvent the wheel unless you're trying to solve a completely new problem, right? So my experience has taught me that the bigger the organization, the more you would have guidelines, or at least uh, technology recommendations to stay within. And it's always a good idea to look and research on popular tools.
Awesome. Funny next question with a follow up here. So, with all that said, how many test automation tools do we have to learn?
I would say at a minimum have one for mobile, have one for UI automation and APIs, right? I mean, traditionally, just like any other technology stack, there's no limit. There's always new tools. My personal experience, and it also, I would asterize this with saying that it depends on your interest, but it's always great to know at least 2 to 3 different tools, right? You don't have to be an expert in each one, right? But it's always good to know 2 to 3, and always read up on newer tools that are coming up, right? Knowing them and being aware of that capabilities is more powerful for you as a tester, right? Versus becoming an expert in each one, because my one objective is start with the common and popular tools, because again they're popular for a reason, right? But I would say anywhere between 2 to 3 tools per type of test is good. Be an expert in one of them, but the other two is easier to always adapt.
Awesome. Okay. So, where do you see the rise of AI and ML making the biggest impact in testing going forward?
So, it's interesting. I always have this discussion with a lot of my peers, right? And one end of the spectrum, people think about AI and ML related tools as replacement for testers, right? And that's always been a fear for a lot of testers, quite honestly, right? My perspective on it is different. My perspective is that uh, AI tools are going to be acting as enablers for testers, right? They're not going to be replacers. I would say the exact same thing for what we had with automation tools, right? So when Selenium and others came into the marketplace, it was a similar conversation everybody had. It's like, oh, testers are going to go away, and machines are going to take over. And look where we are, right? We are the ones as testers using those tools to really make our work easier, right? And I feel the exact same thing with AI and ML. My take on it is the technology of machine learning is going to actually make us be better testers. It'll help us be smarter in terms of selecting what to test and how much to test, right? There's always going to be a human aspect to testing. Sure, our job description will change, where we now have to also train the models to make sure that the testing is happening to our liking and to the effectiveness we need. So my take on it is AI and ML is going to play a critical part to the continued success of testing, but it's going to be more from an enable uh, point of view and not a replacement.
Awesome. Okay. On a relatively unrelated note, what are some of the best practices you've observed around testing with very sensitive data?
With sensitive data, is that the question?
Yep.
Yeah, so I think data masking by default, right, is one of the key things you have to have as part of your strategy guide, right? Especially if you're in a compliance region, you want to make sure that there's a good, effective way of masking data and the rate at which you are refreshing that data for use, right? I think here's another way. There are tools out there. The one I have recently used is a a product called tonic.ai. I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with it, but they offer some free services also where you can plug in data and it actually desensitizes it for you automatically. So I think that sort of masking is the number one aspect of it. The other aspect that I have been able to successfully implement is how the deployments occur within production, right? So I'm also a proponent of continuous testing and continuous delivery. And one of the things that we have observed is as you get into maturities of continuous delivery, you, from a manual perspective, are doing more validations in production. And of course, with sensitive data, traditionally testers don't have access to production. But what we've identified is based on your deployment styles, if you are able to, isolate your builds going into specific clusters of your overall production environment, you can actually access production and have that validations there. It's something that industries are not adopted just yet. So I would think masking is a great way of getting realistic data back into your environments. The other aspect that I also always look at is going and working with the developers to say, hey, what type of field types are you using? And then, backing up to say, hey, let me do validations around that and then leverage capabilities there to say, here's the type of tests I need to do on this field level validations and such.
Great. What are some qualities you look for when building an enterprise QA team?
So I think for me, it's being more of a problem solver rather than an expert in any one tool, right? The logical and the critical thinking aspect is key. The second factor is your communication style and how open you are to listening to an alternate idea, right? I think what over my experience with working with so many different teams worldwide has been where people who are open to discussions and have an open level of communication style are the ones that collaborate really, really well and are successful in solving problems, right? Yes, you need to have a mindset where you are not afraid of change, right? I think that's another important quality. And then somebody who likes to be an engineer at heart, right? You want to tinker with new tools, you want to know and are excited about technology, trying to figure out how best can you apply new solutions and new ways of doing things within your project, right? And the best way to do that is read up, follow blogs, look at alternate mindsets of testing, right? Look at different tools and then be subjective in or objective really in what the pros and cons of the tool sets are. I think at the end of the day, it's being having a mindset of trying to collaborate and solve a problem. I think are the two key skills in addition to being tech savvy that gets most of the teams be as successful as they can be.
That's awesome insight. Thanks for that, Mush. And so following up on the answer to the previous question and a little bit about what you're saying here, the question is, it sounds like basic knowledge, or it sounds like Java is the basic foundation for most tools. How hard is it to learn Java as a newcomer to test automation?
So, Java is definitely popular, right? I mean, if you look at the Next Web or websites that talk about the most popular high-level languages, yeah, Java is in there. I think if you really want to get started with writing code, I would say Java should be not as your first language. My recommendation would be to start with something which is a bit more similar in terms of syntax. And I would recommend Python, right? I'm a big proponent of Python, and one of the key reasons why I say that is because its language structure is very simple. It's more natural language based, so it's very easy to follow the logic through. And I'd say just build from that. right? If I was trying to look at it as an alternate language, I would say Python would be the first one for somebody who wants to learn to write code. Start with that. Udemy and other learning websites have lots of sessions on those. The other tool or language would be Groovy, right? Groovy is another one that is really, really easy to pick up, and that gets you a step closer to the syntax for Java and things of that nature. But I think once you do Python and Groovy, you actually could look at JavaScripts, right, and Angular and things of that nature. To be honest, and then once you're comfortable in those areas, Java would come pretty easily to you as well. But and again, all of this is personal preferences, right? From a tester's perspective, I think personally, I'm a fan also of C Sharp, right? So that's where my experience was prior. So not necessarily Java, right? I mean, I can definitely write code in it, but I wouldn't say it's my strong point, right? I would say C Sharp is a stronger point for me, and definitely Python, right? So if coming back to the root question, if somebody who's starting off with writing code or wants to learn to write code, what language should they pick? My recommendation would be start with Python, go to Groovy, and then figure out what you like and pick something next.
Great. Are there any tips you can share regarding transitioning scripts and the technical debt associated to a new tool or platform?
That one is an open-ended one, in my opinion, right? Because it depends on which two technologies are you migrating from, right? The way I typically do it is rather than concentrate on the technical aspect, I evaluate automation scripts on really what are the different validation areas that they are covering. One of the things that I have learned is if you have bigger teams, what typically happens is because of the time pressure that you face, people create scripts with very limited test scopes just to get things done quicker, right? When you are transitioning or thinking about transitioning, one of the key things you should focus on is what is the test scope of these scripts, and rather than do a one-to-one translation or conversion, which basically you're just moving forward the same technical debt, just different technology stacks, right? I would actually use techniques such as mind mapping to really take a tester's mindset and say, okay, from this particular test script, what are the different validation criteria that I am doing and what is missing? So identifying it in that fashion lets you actually find gaps in what your existing scripts may have, and then as you build mind maps out, you will also be able to identify where there's a sense of overlap or redundancy across multiple scripts, and then you can actually consolidate that as you go to a new platform or a new language of automation, right? That's the real approach I would use. I would not do it as a line for line conversion, quite honestly.
Great. Okay. When just beginning in test automation, where are the best places to start, i.e., the low-hanging fruit for building tests?
So I think the best way to learn test automation really is following blogs, right? I think the way you should tackle becoming a good automation tester, right, is it should be a two-prong approach. The first one is the mindset of a tester. What I have learned in my 20 years of experience talking with developers and coming from that background, really, right, is it's a very different mindset that you apply as a tester. So learn the way of how a tester thinks and how you evaluate systems under test. One of the key resources I would say is Google for James Bark, exploratory testing, right? He has a great blog and a lot of information about his perspective on testing, and whom, by the way, I follow, right? And I look up his thoughts and have had the opportunity of even getting trained by him in our organization, which was awesome. But he's got a lot of great information on context-driven testing, right? He has actually coined this term called rapid software testing. It's under version 3 right now of how it forces individuals to pick up on the mindset and how to think like a tester, right? So I would start with that being one prong. The second prong that I would apply is I would look at test automation university, right? So there's Applet Tools has started this uh, where they actually have a free sort of training mechanism that gives you introductions to different tools as a beginner's way of looking at different things, right? I would definitely go follow blogs from different automation tools, right? Go to Selenium and follow the blogs that people are saying and talking about. Go follow DevOps blogs, right? Uh, Definitely come to KMS Technologies blogs and Kobiton's blogs, where we talk a lot about testing and tools and challenges and solutions, right? It's something that you have to definitely apply yourself for, just because contrary to popular belief that testing is simple and easy, it's really not, right? And it's getting more complicated, quite honestly, because the pressure of time and higher confidence and just the freaking mindedness of audiences of products, right? Where if the software quality doesn't meet their expectation, they're gonna shy away from it and never come back, just because they have so many options right now. So a pretty long-winded response, but I think you have to, take it as a two-prong approach. Focus on the mindset training of a tester, and then also look at different tools that you could use and follow blogs, basically.
Awesome. Listen, just for a bit of clarity there, looks like someone was asking you to repeat some of the references you named, and I know one was James Bach, as well as the
Yes,
Canon Technology blog. Could you reference a couple of the others again, please?
sure. So James Bach is one. Michael Bolton is another one. From a tools perspective, there's Applet Tools, right? They actually offer an AI-based visual test a solution, but more importantly than the tool, they have started like a test automation university, right, where it's free courses that people can sign up for. The other aspect I would say is go to Udemy for courses on Selenium and things of that nature. And then blogs on KMS technology, on Kobiton. Look for another tool called Catalan that we also helped build from the KMS side. It's a free tool also, but a lot of information there as well.
Awesome. Well, we are nearing the end of the webinar. However, we do have a couple more questions. Um, Mush, would you have time for one more, perhaps?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. This one seems to be a pretty good one. Um, I don't work for a company where a top-down directive for mobile has just been handed down. I instead work for a company where the trends seem to indicate that our mobile app is about to eclipse our web revenue. How do I lobby my head of engineering for more support/resources for mobile testing?
Ask them to look at the revenue numbers, right? Usually, when you talk about revenue, that gets everybody's attention, right? What I would also raise would be the risks and challenges, right? That would curb that continuous growth in revenue, right? Look at sites such as the Next Web, right? I think as part of this presentation, we had a reference in one of the data points, and I think if you go look at that, what will help people understand the complexities and the risks that they face by not giving you the necessary capacity and tool sets to be successful is the loss of potential revenue that they would have. Use criteria from the Next Web website that says, hey, here's the different platforms. I'm sure, I think, Drew, I believe you guys have some material on your website that identifies just the different variations of different devices and OS combinations that need to be done to even cover 20% of the real audience out there in the real world, right? So using those risk criterias and combining them with some budget forecast that you may be able to work with your manager on, that becomes a compelling enough story to raise alarm and concern and initiate action from your stakeholders.
Fantastic. And we just had one more come in, and I think we'll wrap after this one if that's okay with you, Mush.
Sure.
All right. Microsoft has deprecated coded UI. They
Mhm.
recommend using Selenium and Appium. Based on your experiences, what scalability and longevity indicators do you look for when choosing a new tool?
So the two common ones I would say would be community support, right, and the ability to expand and extend, right. Coded UI, absolutely. There's reasons why that has been deprecated. I'm sure if you Google for those terms, you'll find that. I don't have to go over those, but the two key important factors for me are, what sort of community support does that tool have, right? And then also how extensible is it for me. So I'll give you an example with a product called Catalan. It's a free tool that's based on Selenium and Appium, but it's got such a big community around it. They average about 4,000 new user downloads every week. They have the ability to create custom keywords within the application. They work with mobile and web applications. So it's really around those two factors, right? How can you really extend and continue to expand on the capabilities? And then also, what is the audience base? The third one also is how do they respond to community questions or questions raised about their product or challenges that you run into, and then if they are transparent enough to even share their roadmap, if it's a tool that a company offers, right? What new features are they going to implement, and things of that nature. The other aspect of it also is how current are they in terms of current trends, right? Are they getting ready to apply in the current state of things machine learning, AI, and what do they mean by it, right? So these two or three key components, right? Support, community, extensibility, and transparency. I think those 3 to 4 factors is what I typically use to evaluate at a very base to even look at tools before getting into the technical aspects of what their capabilities are.
Great, thanks for that insight, Mush. And just as a really quick shameless plug, we're always happy to introduce anyone to our CTO for a roadmap discussion at Kobiton, pending you speak with our sales team. So just want to throw that in there at the end right before we wrap. And with that said, I also want to give a huge thanks out to Mush and everyone who's attended this webinar. Mush, thank you for the awesome insights as usual. Everyone, thank you for attending the webinar. This recording will be available to everyone on our YouTube channel sometime next week. Look for it in the first half of the week or so, by Monday or Tuesday. Anything else from you, Mush?
No, I'm good. Thanks, Drew. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.